The unearthing of a hidden world. On the surface, it looked like nothing more than ordinary farmland. Gentle hills stretched toward the horizon near Carnoustie. In Angus, Scotland, fields worked quietly for centuries, their soil turned by plows, their grasses grazed by sheep. It was the kind of place one could drive past without a second glance, the kind of landscape that seems eternal and unremarkable. But in July 2025, something extraordinary stirred beneath this calm earth. Archaeologists, carrying out what began as a routine survey, stumbled upon signs that the ground itself was holding its breath, shapes visible only through the cold eye of ground-penetrating radar. Patterns appeared, lines too straight, too deliberate to be the work of wind or stone. Beneath the soil, great shadows of oak revealed themselves, waiting to speak after lying silent for nearly 6,000 years. When the first trench was cut, when the soil gave way to massive timbers still resting in the earth, a hush fell over the excavation. These were not fallen branches or random debris. They were beams, carefully cut and placed, preserved by time itself. Their presence told of something immense, something that had once stood tall above the Scottish earth. The discovery was staggering. Before them lay the remains of a colossal timber hall, a structure older than Stonehenge by nearly 1,000 years. To put this into perspective, when the first stones were being raised on Salisbury Plain, this building had already been standing for generations, its beams weathered by centuries of firelight and smoke. Imagine discovering a cathedral older than the pyramids, buried in silence just beyond the edge of a plowed field. Until that moment, historians believed Britain's earliest people of the Neolithic period lived scattered lives, small family groups concerned only with survival, with sowing grain, raising livestock, hunting when they could. Yet here, in the quiet fields of Carnoustie, was proof of something far grander. This was not the work of a few, but of many. This was coordination, vision, and determination etched into oak. And with that realization came deeper, unsettling questions. Who were the builders? What compelled them to gather, to work together, to raise something so vast in an age when most were still adjusting to the rhythms of farming life? And perhaps most haunting of all, why was it abandoned, left to rot into the soil, and forgotten for thousands of years? The beams of Carnoustie whispered of ceremony and fire, of feasts and gatherings, of decisions made under a smoke-darkened roof. Was it a council hall? A temple? A meeting place for tribes who came from miles around? The possibilities are as vast as the silence that now hangs over its remains. One thing, however, is certain. The timber hall forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the earliest communities of Britain. It is not simply an archaeological curiosity. It is a monument that challenges the very timeline of civilization here. It suggests that while the rest of the world looked toward the rising monuments of Mesopotamia or the Nile, the people of Scotland, too, were shaping their own grand designs. And so, beneath the calm of farmland, history shifted. A forgotten hall, 6 millennia old, rose from the dirt to confront us with questions that cut to the heart of what it means to build, to gather, and to remember. It is a reminder that the past is not gone. It waits, patiently, beneath our feet. The silent beams speak. The excavation unfolded slowly, almost like a story revealing itself one page at a time. At first, the only signs were ghostly shapes traced by radar beneath the farmland, symmetrical lines in the soil that didn't belong to geology. Encouraged, the team cut careful trenches into the ground, peeling back centuries of earth, and then the past emerged. Out of the dark soil came oak timbers, preserved astonishingly well for something that had lain hidden for nearly 6 millennia. Some stood upright as they had once been planted. Others lay fallen but intact. Each beam was massive, far beyond the size needed for simple huts or shelters. The archaeologists knew instantly they had stumbled into something unprecedented. Dr. Susan McKay, one of the lead archaeologists, later recalled, "When the first beam appeared, the entire trench went silent. We knew in that instant this was not ordinary." Brushing away soil, realizing I was touching oak shaped by hands thousands of years ago, it felt like reaching across time. As the days passed, the outline of the hall began to emerge. A vast rectangle, about 35 meters long and 9 meters wide. For perspective, that's nearly the size of a modern tennis court. In a world without metal tools or advanced engineering, such precision demanded something more than chance. It demanded planning, leadership, and above all, cooperation. Soon, smaller artifacts began to surface: pottery shards, some intricately decorated, animal bones charred by fire, fragments of flint tools. Together, they suggested more than shelter. This wasn't a simple dwelling, it was a place of gathering. Fires had burned here. Meals had been shared. Rituals likely performed. The beams were silent, but the earth around them began to tell its tale. The media rushed to the site, cameras and headlines eager to capture what scholars were already calling a discovery that could rewrite history. But within the trenches, the atmosphere remained methodical, almost reverent. Each artifact was logged, each soil layer photographed, every new post hole mapped with precision. The archaeologists weren't just uncovering wood and pottery, they were piecing together a vanished world. As the structure took shape, its deliberate design became undeniable. The posts were evenly spaced, aligned with care, creating a geometry too regular to be accidental. This wasn't just a hall. It was a statement, a monument raised by people who understood order and who valued the act of building something greater than themselves. The questions grew more urgent. Who exactly were these builders? What drove them to such effort? Why here, in this particular corner of Scotland, at this particular moment in time? Beneath the rolling farmland of Angus, a forgotten hall had begun to speak again. And with it came the realization that Britain's early Neolithic past was far richer, more complex, and more mysterious than anyone had dared to imagine. Building the impossible. The deeper the excavation went, the clearer the vision of the hall became. Bit by bit, a structure revealed itself, its skeleton still etched into the soil like the outline of a giant long forgotten. Measuring about 35 meters long and 9 meters wide, it was no modest hut. It was a feat of construction that demanded extraordinary labor and coordination. To imagine its scale, think of an ancient people building the footprint of a modern tennis court, without iron, without wheels, without beasts of burden. Every beam had been cut, dragged, and set into place by sheer human will. The oak timbers themselves told a story. Each was chosen carefully from nearby forests, their trunks felled with polished stone axes. Marks still visible on the wood spoke of patient effort, thousands of strikes to bring down a single tree, followed by hours of shaping and smoothing. And yet, when placed together, the timbers fit with remarkable accuracy, forming a geometric pattern that was anything but primitive. These were not improvisations. They were plans executed with precision. Inside the hall, the layout hinted at deliberate organization. Charred earth and soot-blackened stones marked where great hearths once burned, placed at regular intervals down the length of the building. They may have divided the space into zones, each section belonging to a different group, family, or purpose. Imagine the glow of those fires. Children gathered close, elders speaking in low voices, the air thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat. Here, history lived not in silence, but in the sound of laughter, the rhythm of speech, and the crackle of flames. Archaeologists uncovered traces of possible partitions, shallow grooves in the earth, smaller post holes suggesting walls or divisions. Some areas may have stored grain or tools. Others might have been reserved for private meetings, rituals, or sacred rites. A society capable of this construction was not one of mere survival. It was one already shaping the first outlines of culture, hierarchy, and ceremony. Near the entrances, details spoke of intention. Flat stones carefully laid into the earth, forming small, paved thresholds. To step into this hall may not have been casual, it may have been ceremonial, a passage from the ordinary world into the extraordinary. Even in its ruined state, the care placed into these details resonates across time, whispering that this hall was more than shelter. It was meaning made solid in wood. Standing in the field today, archaeologists close their eyes and reconstruct it in their minds. Massive posts rising into the air, supporting a great timber roof, firelight illuminating beams above. Voices echoing in the smoky dark. 6,000 years ago, men and women of Carnoustie walked beneath that roof, their lives bound to this hall by food, ritual, and memory. What astonishes is not just the size, but the fact that it was possible at all, without written plans, without blueprints, without the wheel. These people created something that rivaled the greatest monuments of their age. It is proof that the capacity for vision, the desire to gather, to build, to leave behind something monumental was alive in the Neolithic world, long before the stones of Salisbury or the pyramids of Giza. And so the hall stands, invisible yet undeniable, a reminder that human ambition has always reached beyond necessity, toward the impossible. The dawn of a new people. To understand the significance of Carnoustie's timber hall, we must travel back 6,000 years, to around 4000 BC, a time when the people of Britain stood on the threshold of transformation. For generations they had roamed as hunter-gatherers, following the migrations of red deer, wild boar, and aurochs through the forests, living by what the land and sea could provide. But then, slowly at first, and then with revolutionary speed, something new arrived on their shores: farming. Seeds, tools, and ideas flowed northward from continental Europe, brought by boats that crossed the Channel from what is now France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. With them came domesticated animals, cultivated grains, and a radically different way of life. For the first time in Britain, people began to tether themselves to place. Instead of drifting with the seasons, they carved permanent settlements into the land. They cleared forests with polished stone axes, tilled soil with primitive plows, sowed fields of barley and wheat. The rhythm of the hunt was replaced by the rhythm of the harvest. The discovery of Carnoustie's hall belongs to this pivotal moment, the dawn of the Neolithic. Communities here were no longer small, scattered groups, but networks bound together by food, trade, and ritual. A hall of such size could not have been built without shared purpose, without dozens of hands working in unison. It suggests leadership, cooperation, and vision, perhaps even the first glimmerings of social hierarchy. Someone had to decide which trees to fell, where to place each post, when the work would begin. Someone had to feed the workers, store the grain, craft the pottery, and tend the livestock while others built. Daily life in these villages was far from simple, yet astonishingly organized. At dawn, men and women rose to tend barley fields and herds of cattle. Children carried water in clay pots, collected firewood, and learned by watching their elders. Women ground grain into flour with stone querns, their steady rhythm echoing like a heartbeat through the settlement. Hunters still roamed the forests for deer and wild boar, supplementing the diet with meat and hides, while gatherers brought back berries, nuts, and herbs. Nothing was wasted, and everything required cooperation. Trade and travel stitched these early societies into a wider fabric. Pottery styles unearthed in Carnoustie matched designs from across Europe, a sign that ideas and goods flowed far beyond the village's horizon. Flint tools from southern England, beads carved from distant seashells all found their way north.
The people of Carnoustie were not isolated farmers clinging to survival. They were part of a vibrant, interconnected world. It is here, in this context, that the hall begins to make sense. It was not a dwelling for a single family. It was something larger, a place where clans came together to share food, resolve disputes, arrange marriages, and perhaps honor ancestors. Within its vast walls, the community became more than the sum of its parts. What we see in Carnoustie is evidence of a society confident enough to raise monuments, to carve permanence into a fleeting world. And in this timber hall, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, we glimpse the very beginnings of what we might call civilization in Britain.
A hall of feasts and fires. As the excavation deepened, the scattered evidence began to paint a vivid picture of life within the hall. The soil held more than beams. It held fragments of stories, animal bones, pottery shards, and charred stones that together revealed how this place had once pulsed with human energy. The bones were the first clue. Thousands of them, from cattle, sheep, and pigs, all bearing marks of butchery, many charred by fire. They were not the refuse of daily meals. These were the remains of feasts on a massive scale. Imagine entire herds slaughtered, roasting over great hearths, their fat sizzling into the flames, the smell of meat filling the cavernous space. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people gathering together, drawn from scattered settlements across the region. These gatherings were not only for nourishment, they were ceremonies of unity, binding clans through the shared act of eating. Pottery fragments confirmed this impression. Some were plain, used for storage or cooking. Others were decorated with careful patterns, incised by hand before firing. These vessels were not just utilitarian, they were symbolic, their designs carrying meaning, their presence suggesting ritual. Pottery is fragile, yet it survives for millennia, whispering of the meals once prepared, the drinks once poured, the toasts once raised in this timber hall. The hearths themselves formed a rhythm down the center of the building, fire after fire aligned in deliberate sequence. They were like glowing milestones, dividing the hall into distinct zones. Perhaps each fire represented a group, a clan, or a family. Perhaps each had its own place in the order of society. Around these flames, decisions may have been made, alliances forged, quarrels resolved. Firelight does not merely warm, it illuminates, unites, and sanctifies. Even the entrances carried meaning. At certain thresholds, archaeologists uncovered paving stones deliberately laid into the soil. Why take such care for an entrance unless it mattered? To step onto those stones may have been more than crossing into a building. It may have been a symbolic act, a transition from the mundane world outside to the sacred or communal world within. Every detail hints that this hall was designed to impress, to inspire awe, to remind those who entered that they were part of something greater than themselves. The scale of the feast suggests more than celebration. They were acts of politics and ceremony. Hosting such gatherings required immense preparation. Hunting, herding, storing grain, brewing drink, crafting vessels. It meant mobilizing resources far beyond a single household. These feasts reinforced alliances, displayed wealth and power, and reaffirmed the bonds of community. In many ancient societies, the feast was as important as the battle or the harvest. Here too, food was politics, and politics was ritual. And yet, the hall's function was likely not limited to celebration. Its size, centrality, and deliberate construction suggest it may also have served as a seat of governance, where disputes were resolved and leaders chosen. Ritual and politics often blended seamlessly in the ancient world. There was no division between sacred and civic. To light a fire, to share a meal, to make a decision, each was part of the same great act of community. Though we may never know precisely what words were spoken within those walls, the evidence leaves little doubt. The Carnoustie Timber Hall was the heart of a people. It was where survival became culture, where food became ritual, and where gathering became memory.
Shadows of stone and wood. For centuries, when people thought of Britain's prehistory, one monument loomed above all others: Stonehenge. Those giant sarcens, dragged from miles away, arranged in mysterious circles aligned with the sun, have long been considered the pinnacle of early construction. Yet Carnoustie forces us to widen the lens. Here stood a structure older than Stonehenge by nearly 1,000 years. Long before the first trilithons were raised on Salisbury Plain, men and women in Scotland were building something no less impressive, though its material was softer, more vulnerable to time. Unlike the cold permanence of stone, Carnoustie's hall was made of oak. Massive timbers, harvested from nearby forests, shaped with stone tools and raised with human muscle alone. Stonehenge dazzles us with distant stones hauled across land and water. Carnoustie humbles us with precision symmetry, geometry, and deliberate design in wood that has long since decayed. Both are monumental achievements, yet they represent different languages of architecture. One speaks through stone and sky, the other through wood and fire. Comparisons ripple outward. At Avebury, centuries later, enormous standing stones formed vast circles, echoing with ritual. In Orkney, the Ness of Brodgar emerged, a stone-built complex of houses and temples that astonishes even today. But Carnoustie predates them all. It stands at the dawn, proof that the instinct to build, to create communal monuments, was already alive in Britain long before these later wonders. Beyond Britain, the echoes grow louder. Across northern Europe, in Germany and Denmark, archaeologists have unearthed great timber longhouses dating to similar periods, some stretching even longer than Carnoustie's hall. They too bore signs of ceremony and gathering. The discovery in Scotland connects it to this wider world, showing that Neolithic Europe was not a series of isolated tribes, but a continent of shared ideas, traditions, and monumental ambition. And yet, one question lingers. Why have we only now uncovered Carnoustie's hall, when Stonehenge has stood in plain sight for millennia? The answer lies in the nature of the materials themselves. Stone endures. Stone resists time. Timber, however mighty, eventually falls to rot and soil. Whole worlds of wood once stood across Europe, raised in pride and purpose, but centuries of decay erased them from view. What we know of prehistory is shaped by survival, and survival favors stone. That is why Carnoustie matters so profoundly. It reminds us that Britain's earliest monumental architecture was not carved from rock, but from trees. It was rooted in the living forest, in beams cut from oak and raised skyward to shelter community. For every Stonehenge, there may have been a dozen Carnousties, now vanished into earth, their memory buried until rediscovery. Standing on that quiet Scottish farmland, it is easy to feel both wonder and melancholy. Wonder, because we have glimpsed a world older and more complex than we imagined. Melancholy, because it reminds us how much has been lost, whole monuments erased, waiting only as shadows beneath our feet. And so Carnoustie does more than challenge Stonehenge. It asks us to reconsider the story of early Britain entirely. It tells us that the urge to build, to gather, to monumentalize human existence began earlier, spread wider, and spoke through wood as powerfully as through stone. Scotland's hidden map. If Carnoustie teaches us anything, it is that history hides in plain sight. For thousands of years, farmers plowed those fields, sheep grazed on the grass, and no one suspected that beneath their feet lay a hall older than Stonehenge. How many other secrets lie waiting under Scotland's soil? Today, archaeology has new eyes. Technologies like LiDAR, laser scanning from the sky, reveal the contours of buried worlds. What once took generations of guesswork can now be glimpsed in a matter of hours. Dense forests and thick farmland yield their hidden geometry under the sweep of a laser beam. Ditches, enclosures, circles, and rectangles etched faintly into the earth. Combined with aerial photography and ground-penetrating radar, the Scottish landscape is transforming into a map of invisible history. Already, these tools are reshaping what we know. In Aberdeenshire, LiDAR scans revealed vast Neolithic enclosures hidden beneath farmland, their outlines invisible from the ground. In the Scottish borders, surveys uncovered evidence of ancient timber structures not unlike Carnoustie's Hall. Each new find suggests that Scotland was not a marginal land on the edge of Europe, but a thriving hub of early communities building, trading, and gathering in ways we have barely begun to comprehend. The implications are staggering. If one great timber hall could lie buried beneath centuries of farmland at Carnoustie, then others surely remain hidden. Perhaps entire networks of monuments, halls, enclosures, ceremonial spaces still slumber beneath the plowed fields and rolling hills. Each discovery points not to isolation, but to connection. Villages linked by pathways, traditions shared across regions, people gathering for rituals that bound them together in identity and belief. And yet, there is poetry in this invisibility. Stone calls attention to itself. Timber vanishes. What survives is a world distorted by time, one in which we celebrate what the earth chose to preserve and overlook what it allowed to dissolve. Technology, however, gives us a second chance. It lets us peer beneath the skin of the land, to trace the faint scars of posts, the buried hearths, the forgotten walls. Standing over the site of Carnoustie, archaeologists no longer see a single hall. They see possibility a network of lost structures, entire communities woven into the land. Scotland becomes not just a landscape of hills and fields, but a palimpsest of human ambition, layered invisibly beneath every stone and stream. Perhaps the most haunting realization is this: what we call ordinary countryside is anything but. Every ridge may be a buried wall. Every circle in a field may be the ghost of a ritual site. Every farm may conceal the memory of a gathering place older than history itself. Scotland's hidden map is only just beginning to be drawn, and with each new discovery, the story of its earliest people grows richer, stranger, and far more extraordinary than we ever imagined. Beyond the hall, the future of the past. The discovery of the timber hall at Carnoustie may feel like the climax of a story, but for archaeologists, it is only the beginning. What has been uncovered so far is just a fraction of what lies beneath the soil, and the work ahead promises to be as revealing as the initial find. Already, teams are preparing to widen the excavations. Ground-penetrating radar has detected hints of other structures nearby, smaller halls, perhaps, or dwellings that may once have clustered around the great building like satellites around a sundae. Each trench promises new fragments, pottery still bearing the fingerprint of its maker, seeds preserved in charred earth, tools discarded in the rush of activity 6,000 years ago. Every shard is a word in the lost language of the Neolithic. Science is sharpening its tools as well. Soil samples will be sifted for ancient pollen, revealing the plants that once grew around the site. Microscopic analysis of pottery may expose traces of food, soups, grains, even milk that once nourished the people who gathered here. Radiocarbon dating grows more precise with every year, narrowing the timeline, showing us not just when the hall was built, but how long it was used, how many generations passed beneath its roof. International collaboration brings new eyes and fresh methods. Teams from across Europe are lending their expertise, comparing Carnoustie with other great timber halls discovered in Germany, Denmark, and beyond. Together, they are building a broader picture of a Europe tied not by borders, but by shared traditions of building, feasting, and remembering. Equally important is the work of preservation. Oak beams that have slept in the soil for 6 millennia are fragile, easily destroyed once exposed to air. Specialists are racing to stabilize and conserve them, so future generations can study, and perhaps even one day see, the timbers that once held up Scotland's first great hall. These are not just artifacts. They are voices. To preserve them is to preserve a story that might otherwise slip away again into silence. And yet, the greatest questions remain unanswered. Was this hall unique, or one of many? Was it the seat of local leadership, a temple of ritual, a marketplace of exchange, or all of these at once? Did it fall into disuse because of changing customs, or because of crisis, famine, disease, or conflict? Was it abandoned peacefully, its timbers left to sink back into the earth, or was it deliberately destroyed as part of some ceremony of closure? What we know is tantalizing. What we don't know may be greater still, and that is the essence of archaeology, not the finality of answers, but the invitation of questions. Each discovery is a doorway, opening onto further mysteries. When we look at the Carnoustie Timber Hall, we are not merely studying a building. We are witnessing a moment in humanity's great unfolding, a time when people first began to gather, to build, to imagine permanence in a world of impermanence. It is not just a story of Scotland, but a story of us all, of our shared need to create meaning, to leave something behind, to carve our existence into the fabric of the earth. And so the dig continues. With every brush of soil, every fragment lifted from the ground, we come a little closer to understanding the world of our ancestors. A hall once lost has risen again, not in timber, but in memory. And from the quiet farmland of Carnoustie, a voice 6,000 years old whispers across time. We were here. We built. We remembered.